This is going to be a long one, but I need to get it out of my system, and honestly, I need some perspective. My name's Mark, I'm 34, and my wife, Jenna, is 32. We've been married for 8 years, and on the surface, we've had a great life. Jenna is smart, funny, and absolutely beautiful, like movie star beautiful. Blonde curly hair, a bright smile, and a laugh that can light up any room. She's also incredibly ambitious, running her own hotel and restaurant business, which she built from the ground up. I've always been proud of her. I'm a lawyer, so I get the grind, but she took it to a whole new level. We live in a big house in the suburbs, drive nice cars, and take vacations to beautiful places. It looks perfect. But looking back, the cracks started to show years ago. I've been working long hours for as long as I can remember, trying to secure a future for us. And Jenna has been doing the same with her business. Somewhere along the way, though, we stopped being us. Conversations turned into logistical exchanges. What time's dinner? Are you picking up the dry cleaning? Did you pay the landscaper? You get the idea. We were like two cogs in a machine, running parallel, but never really connecting. It wasn't always like that. When we first got married, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. But now, sex had become rare and routine. We both knew it, but we didn't talk about it. Then there were the little signs, the things I ignored because I trusted her completely. Jenna started dressing up more, even when she was just running errands or meeting a friend for coffee. She seemed happier, but not in a way that included me. She'd laugh at her phone sometimes, saying it was just a funny meme or a work text. It felt off, but I didn't want to be the guy who accuses his wife of something just because she's happy. Still, the distance between us grew. I chalked it up to stress, to life, to us just being busy. But deep down, I think I knew something was wrong. Looking back, I think the first real clue came one quiet Sunday afternoon. Jenna was in her home office, supposedly reviewing menus for one of her restaurants. I was in the kitchen making coffee when her phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't even glance at it, but this time, the screen lit up, and I saw a name I didn't recognize, Ryan. The message read, "Yesterday was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." My stomach dropped. At first, I told myself it had to be work-related. Jenna worked with a lot of people, and maybe Ryan was a chef or a vendor. But that message didn't feel professional. It felt personal. I didn't say anything right away. I put her phone down and went back to my coffee, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But all afternoon, I couldn't shake the unease. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I asked casually, "Who's Ryan?" Jenna froze for a split second, so quick you'd miss it if you weren't looking. But I was. "Oh, he's a photographer I met at an art event a while back," she said, her voice steady. I was thinking of hiring him to do some shots for the restaurant. It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. I let it go for the moment, but my mind was racing. Why was a photographer texting her like that? And why hadn't she mentioned him before? Over the next few days, I started to notice more. Jenna was on her phone a lot, always smiling at the screen, but she'd quickly put it away if I walked into the room. She started staying out later than usual, saying she was meeting with her team or attending networking events. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. This was Jenna, my wife, the woman I'd built my life with. She wouldn't betray me, would she? But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. I decided I needed answers. I didn't want to be the guy who snoops through his wife's phone, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. So one night, after Jenna fell asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. Her lock screen didn't have any notifications, which meant she must have silenced them. That was unusual for her. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, but the doubt and suspicion won out. I guessed her passcode on the first try. What I found made my blood run cold. There were texts from Ryan. Lots of them. Some were innocent enough, comments about photography, art, even food. But others? Others crossed a line. "Can't wait to see you again. Your laugh is my new favorite sound. Last night was magical. I can still feel your touch." And the pictures. God, the pictures. Jenna, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, standing in what looked like a studio. In one, her golden curls framed her face perfectly as she leaned into Ryan. It wasn't overtly romantic, but there was an intimacy there that cut me to the core. Then I saw a thread from just a few days ago. Ryan, are you free tonight? I've been counting the hours. Jenna, me too. I'll leave after the meeting. I closed the phone and sat there in the dark, my hands shaking. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. How long had this been going on? What did he mean by last night? Was this just emotional? Or was it more? I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, reliving every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. And when Jenna woke up the next morning, smiling and stretching like she didn't have a care in the world, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Are you going to be home for dinner tonight?" She smiled. "I'll try, but I've got a late meeting with the staff. Don't wait up for me." I nodded, playing along, but inside I was breaking. That evening, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. I needed more than texts and pictures. I needed the full truth. So, I followed her. I waited until Jenna left the house that evening, dressed impeccably as usual in a fitted blazer and heels that clicked confidently on the driveway. She told me she was heading to a meeting at one of her restaurants. I gave her a smile and a quick kiss on the cheek, pretending everything was normal, but my heart was pounding. The moment her car pulled out, I grabbed my keys and followed at a distance. My palms were sweaty, and my mind was racing with scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was she really going to a meeting, or was this a rendezvous with Ryan? She drove into the city, and I trailed her, careful not to get too close. My stomach turned as she pulled into a parking lot, not near her restaurant, but near an art studio. She got out of the car, glancing around briefly, and then walked inside. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, debating what to do next. Should I confront her now? Should I wait and see what happened? Part of me wanted to barge in and demand answers, but another part of me was paralyzed by fear. What if I was wrong? What if this was all just a misunderstanding? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. After about 15 minutes, I got out of my car and crossed the street, my heart hammering in my chest. The building was quiet, the kind of place that felt intimate and secluded. I pushed open the door to the studio, and that's when I saw them. Ryan was standing near a large canvas, his camera slung around his neck, laughing at something Jenna had said. She was sitting on a stool, her blonde curls catching the light from the overhead fixtures, her face glowing with an expression I hadn't seen in years. It was like watching a scene from someone else's life. They looked so comfortable, so familiar with each other. She wasn't just posing for a photograph. She was completely at ease, leaning into him as if he were the only person in the world. I wanted to say something, to shout, to make them see me standing there, but I couldn't move. Instead, I turned and walked out, my hands clenched into fists. Back in my car, I sat in silence, staring at the studio. This wasn't just a casual friendship. This wasn't innocent. And yet, I still didn't have the courage to confront her. Instead, I went home and waited. When Jenna came back late that night, she smelled faintly of paint and perfume. She smiled at me, her face glowing, and said, "Sorry I'm so late." The meeting ran over. I looked at her for a long moment, wondering how she could lie so easily, so convincingly. "It's okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You must be tired." She nodded, kissed my cheek, and went upstairs. And I sat there, staring at the door, knowing that everything in our marriage had changed. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. Jenna was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. It was the image of normalcy, and it made my blood boil. I sat across from her, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Jenna," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. She glanced up, smiling. "Morning, love. Want me to make you some eggs?" "No," I said, sharper than I intended. She frowned, setting her mug down. "What's wrong?" she asked, tilting her head, her tone suddenly cautious. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I followed you last night." Her face didn't change right away, but I saw it. The subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the way her fingers froze mid-reach for her coffee. "What do you mean?" she said, her voice too calm, too controlled. "I mean, I saw you at the studio. With Ryan." The The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. "Mark, it's not what you think," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice rising. Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were having a great time with him. Laughing, smiling, lying to me. She ran a hand through her curls, a nervous habit I knew all too well. "It's not. I mean, yes, I've been spending time with him, but it's just he's helping me find myself again, Mark. I've felt so lost, so invisible. And he makes me feel alive." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "Feel alive? Jenna, you're married to me. What about us?" She looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know anymore." That hit harder than I expected. For years, I'd blamed our growing distance on the stress of work, on life getting in the way. But hearing her admit that she wasn't sure about us anymore, was like a punch to the gut. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. "Yes," she finally said, her voice breaking. "It just happened. I didn't plan for it, but you did it." I cut her off, my voice shaking with anger. "You made a choice, Jenna. You chose him." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "I swear, Mark, I never wanted to hurt you." "Congratulations," I said bitterly. "You've done a great job of that." I stood up, unable to look at her anymore. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. "Mark, wait," she called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing sense of loss. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had, was slipping through my fingers, and I had no idea what to do next. I spent hours driving around that day, replaying the confrontation in my head over and over. Every word, every tear, every moment of hesitation. By the time I got home, the sun had set, and I felt like a hollow shell of myself. Jenna was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when I walked in, but I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and sat at the dining table, staring at the glass as if it held the answers I desperately needed. "Mark," she said softly, standing in the doorway. "Please, can we talk?" "What's there to talk about, Jenna?" I said, my voice flat. "You cheated. You broke us." "I know," she whispered, stepping closer. "I made a mistake. A horrible, selfish mistake. But it wasn't because I don't love you. I do, Mark. I always have." I looked up at her then, my anger flaring. "Don't you dare say you love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have slept with him. You wouldn't have lied to my face for weeks, maybe months." She flinched, tears streaming down her face again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Not right now. Maybe not ever. But I need you to understand." "Understand?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You want me to understand why you decided to screw around with some photographer while I've been working my ass off to build a life for us? Are you kidding me?" She collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands, sobbing. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the way she smiled at him, the way she hesitated before admitting what she'd done. "I need some space," I said finally, standing up. "I can't look at you right now." "Where are you going?" she asked, panic flashing across her face. "To a hotel," I said, grabbing my overnight bag from the closet and shoving in a few essentials. "Don't call me. Don't text me. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm going to do." She didn't try to stop me this time. As I walked out the door, I heard her sobs echoing through the house, but I didn't turn back. That night in the hotel was the loneliest night of my life. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it all started falling apart. Was it my fault? Had I been too focused on work? Had I missed the signs? I didn't sleep much, and when I did, my dreams were filled with images of Jenna and Ryan, laughing together, touching, kissing. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and the realization hit me like a freight train. I couldn't unsee it. No matter how much she apologized, no matter what excuses she gave, I would never look at her the same way again. The next morning, I decided I needed more than just space. I needed clarity. So, I called my best friend, Alex, and asked if we could meet. Alex and I had been friends since college. He was one of the few people I trusted implicitly, and I knew he wouldn't sugarcoat things. When I called him, he immediately agreed to meet, no questions asked. We met at a small cafe downtown, far enough from home that I didn't have to worry about running into anyone I knew. Alex was already seated when I arrived, a coffee in front of him, and his ever-casual demeanor steady as a rock. "You look like hell," he said as I sat down. "Feel like it too," I replied, forcing a weak smile. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning forward. "You sounded wrecked on the phone." I hesitated for a moment, then let it all spill out. The text, the affair, the confrontation. By the time I finished, Alex was leaning back in his chair, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. "Damn, man," he said finally. "I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry." "Yeah," I muttered, staring into my untouched coffee. "Me too." We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "What are you going to do?" "That's the thing," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away, file for divorce, and never look back. But another part of me, I don't know. I don't know if I can just throw 8 years away." Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your life, your marriage. But you need to ask yourself a few things. First, can you ever trust her again? Because without trust, there's no point. And second, do you even want to?" His words hit me hard. Could I trust her again? Could I ever look at Jenna without seeing her with Ryan? And even if I could, did I want to put in the work to rebuild what she'd broken? I just keep thinking about where I went wrong. I admitted. Was I too focused on work? Did I ignore her needs? "Stop," Alex said firmly. "This isn't on you. Yeah, maybe things weren't perfect, but she had options, Mark. She could have talked to you, gone to therapy, hell, even asked for a separation if she was that unhappy. But she didn't. She made a choice, and that choice was to betray you. Don't carry that guilt. It's not yours to carry." I nodded, his words sinking in. He was right. Jenna had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. "Have you talked to a lawyer yet?" Alex asked. "No, not yet," I admitted. "I don't even know if I want to go down that road." "Well, whether you do or not, it wouldn't hurt to get some advice. Just to know your options." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah, maybe. I don't even know where to start." "Start by taking care of yourself," Alex said. "You've been through hell, and you're not going to figure this out overnight. Take it one step at a time." As I left the cafe, I felt a small weight lifted off my shoulders. Alex hadn't given me any easy answers, but he'd reminded me that I didn't have to figure everything out all at once. And for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope that I might get through this one way or another. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Alex was right. I needed to take care of myself first and figure out what I wanted. To do that, I had to stop swimming in a sea of what-ifs and get answers. Whether I chose to fight for my marriage or walk away, I couldn't make that decision in the dark. I called a lawyer, not to file for divorce, but to understand my rights and what a separation might look like. Her name was Rachel, and within 10 minutes of our consultation, I felt like I'd finally found a lifeline. Rachel didn't sugarcoat things. She laid out the legal and financial implications of both staying and leaving. "It's not about making a decision right now," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "It's about knowing what you're stepping into, whatever path you choose." After the call, I felt more grounded. If I decided to leave Jenna, I wouldn't be walking blindly into chaos. But even with that clarity, the thought of ending our marriage made my chest tighten. Later that day, I decided to take another step toward clarity. I needed to talk to Jenna, not about the affair, but about us. What had brought us to this point? Were there things I had missed? Had she tried to reach out, only for me to ignore her? When I got home, she was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and strained, as though she hadn't slept in days. "Mark," she said softly, sitting up. "Can we talk?" I nodded, sitting down in the chair opposite her. "Yeah, we need to." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know you probably hate me right now," she began, "and I don't blame you. I hate myself for what I've done, but I need you to know it wasn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong. Then what was it about, Jenna? I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you threw away everything we built for, what? A fling? A fantasy? It wasn't a fling, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't about sex or even about Ryan. It was about feeling seen, feeling alive. I felt so disconnected from myself, from you, from everything. And he made me feel like I mattered again. Her words hit me like a gut punch. As much as I wanted to stay angry, I couldn't ignore the truth in them. I'd been distant. Work had consumed me, and I hadn't been the best partner. But was that an excuse for what she'd done? And you couldn't tell me that? I asked, my voice rising. You couldn't come to me and say, Mark, I'm struggling. I need you. Instead, you chose to cheat. I didn't know how to say it, she said, her voice breaking. And by the time I realized how far I'd gone, I didn't know how to stop. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of her words hanging between us. Finally, I said, Jenna, I'm not going to make any decisions today. I need time, but I need to know something. Are you still seeing him? She shook her head quickly. No, I ended it. I told him it was over, and that I needed to focus on fixing the mess I made. Her answer was a small relief, but it didn't change the fact that she had betrayed me. Good, I said, because if you hadn't, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. That night, I slept in the guest room, the silence of the house pressing down on me. I still didn't know what the future held, but at least now I had a sliver of understanding. And as painful as it was, that understanding was the first step toward deciding what came next. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog. Jenna was trying, I'll give her that. She stayed home, kept her distance when I needed space, and didn't bombard me with apologies. But every time I looked at her, I saw Ryan's texts, the photos, the way she had smiled at him. It was like a wound that refused to close. I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy and keep my mind from spiraling. It helped during the day, but nights were brutal. The house felt cold and foreign, like a museum of our failed marriage. Even the small things, her favorite mug in the dishwasher, the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway, were constant reminders of what we'd lost. One evening, Alex called to check in. How are you holding up? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Some days I think I can move past it. Other days I think divorce is the only option. That's normal, he said. You're grieving, man. Grieving the life you thought you had. But you've got to figure out what you want. Forget what she wants. Forget what anyone else thinks. What do you want? It was a good question, but one I didn't have an answer to yet. I've been thinking about therapy, I said. For myself, to get some clarity. Good idea, Alex said. And if you decide to stay and work things out, couples therapy wouldn't hurt either. But start with you. Figure out your head first. The next day, I booked a session with a therapist named Dr. Harper. She specialized in relationships and infidelity, and something about her no-nonsense profile on the website made me feel like she'd cut through the noise. During our first session, she asked me to talk about the marriage, what it was like before, what had changed, and how I was feeling now. I told her everything, from Jenna's long hours to my own distractions with work, to the moment I saw that first text from Ryan. What hurts the most about her betrayal? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. The lies, I said finally. The fact that she chose someone else over me. It makes me feel like I wasn't enough. Dr. Harper nodded. That's a common feeling in situations like this. But it's important to remember that her choice to cheat says more about her than it does about you. Her actions reflect her own struggles and insecurities, not your worth. Her words resonated with me, but they didn't erase the pain. What do I do now? I asked. How do I even begin to decide if I can stay with her? That depends on what you want from a marriage, she said. Do you think Jenna is capable of doing the work to rebuild trust? And more importantly, do you think you're capable of forgiving her? Not just for her sake, but for yours? I left the session with more questions than answers, but for the first time, I felt like I had a path forward. That night, Jenna approached me cautiously. Mark, can we talk? I nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said, her voice trembling. And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I'll do whatever it takes, therapy, counseling, anything. Just please don't give up on me. On us. Her words were sincere, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with. But sincerity alone wasn't enough. I don't know if I can, Jenna, I said honestly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to earn it back. As I watched her cry, I felt the weight of her words. Could I give her that chance? Did I even wanna? The days stretched into weeks, each one filled with an uneasy dance of avoidance and strained attempts at normalcy. Jenna and I were in this strange limbo. She was trying, I could see that, but I wasn't ready to meet her halfway. Every conversation, every glance, felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of unresolved emotions. One afternoon, while working late at the office, I got a call from Ryan. His name flashed on my phone, and for a second, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want? I said sharply. Mark, I know you have no reason to listen to me, Ryan began, his voice calm but firm. But I need to say something. You've got 5 seconds, I snapped, already regretting picking up the call. I'm sorry, he said. I know that probably means nothing to you, but I need you to hear it. I never should have gotten involved with Jenna. She told me things weren't good between you two, but I should have stayed out of it. It wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to her. His words stunned me into silence. I didn't know what I expected. Arrogance, maybe, or an attempt to justify his actions, but not this. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. Because she ended it, he said. She told me she wanted to work things out with you, and I realized I had no right to be in the picture. I needed to take responsibility for my part in all this. I wanted to lash out, to tell him to go to hell, but instead I just said, stay out of our lives. I will, he said, and then the line went dead. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the call. It didn't change anything. Jenna still betrayed me, and Ryan was still a part of that betrayal. But his words forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding, the reality of what Jenna had said about our marriage. Had I been so focused on my career that I'd failed to see her slipping away? Could I have done more to make her feel seen, loved, appreciated? The questions churned in my mind, and for the first time, I wasn't sure who was more at fault, Jenna for cheating or me for neglecting her needs. When I got home, Jenna was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She looked up when I walked in, her expression cautious but hopeful. Hey, she said softly. Hey, I replied, setting my bag down. I hesitated, then added, I got a call from Ryan today. Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. What did he say? That he was sorry, I said, and that you told him it was over. She nodded, her eyes welling up. I did. I told him I needed to focus on fixing this, on fixing us. Her honesty caught me off guard. For the first time in weeks, I saw her vulnerability, not the guilt-ridden Jenna who had been walking on eggshells, but the Jenna who genuinely wanted to make things right. I don't know if we can fix this, I said, my voice cracking. But I'm willing to try. On one condition. Anything, she said, her voice trembling. We go to therapy together. If we're going to rebuild this, we need help. Relief washed over her face, and she nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Whatever it takes. The first therapy session was brutal. Dr. Harper didn't pull any punches, and neither did I. We laid everything out on the table. The distance that had grown between us, Jenna's betrayal, my workaholism, and the ways we had both failed each other. It's not about assigning blame, Dr. Harper said at the end of the session. It's about understanding why this happened and deciding if you're both willing to do the work to move forward. That night, as we sat in the living room, Jenna reached for my hand. For the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. Thank you, she whispered, for giving us a chance. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to thank her for anything. But as I looked at her, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, a flicker of hope. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it too. Our second therapy session began with Dr. Harper asking us to dig deeper into the emotions we had been avoiding. It was awkward at first, sitting in that small, sterile room with Jenna beside me, but it didn't take long for the conversation to become raw. I want to understand why you felt you couldn't talk to me, I said, looking at Jenna directly. Why did you think cheating was the answer instead of telling me you were unhappy? Jenna hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap. I don't know if I can explain it perfectly, she said, her voice trembling. It wasn't like I woke up one day and decided to do this. It happened gradually. I felt invisible, Mark. You were so busy with work, and I didn't want to add to your stress. But the more I kept quiet, the lonelier I felt. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my anger in check. And Ryan? Was he just convenient? It wasn't like that, she said, her eyes brimming with tears. He made me feel noticed, like I mattered again, but I know that doesn't excuse what I did. I was selfish, and I hurt you. Dr. Harper interjected. Jenna, it's important to acknowledge that while your feelings are valid, the choices you made in response to those feelings were harmful. Mark, how do you feel hearing this? Honestly, I feel like I failed her. I admitted, the word surprising even me. I've been so focused on building a life for us, on making sure we had everything we needed, that I didn't see her slipping away. But at the same time, I can't help but think she should have told me. How was I supposed to fix something I didn't know was broken? That's a fair point, Dr. Harper said. Communication is a two-way street, and when one person withdraws, it can create a vicious cycle. The question now is, are you both willing to break that cycle? Over the next few sessions, we began to peel back the layers of our marriage. I learned things about Jenna I hadn't known or hadn't paid attention to in years, like how she had always wanted to take an art class but never had the time, or how she felt like she was losing herself in the roles of wife and businesswoman. And I opened up too, sharing how the pressure of my career had weighed on me, how I convinced myself that providing for us financially was the same as being there for her emotionally. It wasn't easy. Some sessions ended in tears, others in awkward silence. But through it all, I began to see Jenna not just as the woman who had betrayed me, but as the person I had fallen in love with, a person who was flawed just like me. One night, after a particularly emotional session, we sat together on the couch. For the first time in months, the silence between us felt comfortable instead of suffocating. I never wanted this to happen, Jenna said quietly. If I could go back and undo it, I would. I know, I said, surprising myself. And I meant it. I still wasn't sure if I could fully forgive her, but I could see how much she regretted her choices. What about you? She asked, her voice hesitant. Do you think you can forgive me? I didn't answer right away. I think forgiveness is a process, I said finally. I'm not there yet, but I'm willing to try. That's all I can promise right now. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't just tears of guilt or sorrow. There was hope there too. In the weeks that followed, Jenna and I started taking deliberate steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. Therapy became our anchor, a place where we could speak honestly without fear of judgment or interruption. Dr. Harper helped us identify patterns that had led to our disconnect, and slowly, we began to rewrite those patterns. One of the first steps was redefining how we spent time together. We started having dinner at the table, no phones, no distractions. It felt strange at first, like we were strangers trying to reconnect, but as the days passed, the conversations came more naturally. We talked about work, shared stories from our day, and even laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in our home in what felt like years. Jenna also started making changes on her own. She cut back her hours at work and signed up for an art class she'd been eyeing for months. It's something for me, she explained one evening, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in ages. Something to remind myself who I am outside of everything else. I couldn't deny that I admired her determination, even if part of me was still guarded. Trust was a fragile thing, and while her efforts were a step in the right direction, I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. But progress wasn't linear. One night, as I was putting away laundry, I came across an old sweater of hers that smelled faintly of her favorite perfume. Without warning, an image of her with Ryan flashed in my mind, her leaning into him, smiling, laughing in a way she hadn't with me in so long. The anger bubbled up, sharp and raw, catching me off guard. When I came downstairs, Jenna immediately noticed my mood. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the book she was reading. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice trembling. Every time I start to feel like we're moving forward, something reminds me of what you did, and it feels like I'm right back at square one. Her face fell, but she didn't try to defend herself. Instead, she nodded. I know, and I don't expect this to be easy. I want you to tell me when you're feeling like this. Don't keep it bottled up. It's hard, I said, sitting down across from her. It's hard to let myself believe you won't hurt me again. I understand, she said, her voice soft but steady. And all I can do is keep proving to you that I'm committed to us. I know it'll take time, and I'm okay with that. Her patience surprised me. This wasn't the Jenna who had been defensive and evasive when I first confronted her. This was someone who was genuinely trying to rebuild the trust she'd shattered. As the weeks turned into months, we started to find a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But there was a sense of mutual effort that hadn't been there before. I began to see glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with, and she, in turn, seemed to see me in a way she hadn't in years. But just when I thought we might be turning a corner, life threw us another curveball. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I got a call from Jenna. Her voice was shaky, her words hurried. "Mark, I just saw Ryan," she said, her breathing uneven. "He showed up in my art class. I didn't talk to him, but it rattled me. The mention of his name was enough to send a chill down my spine." "What did he want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I don't know," she said. "He didn't approach me, but I could feel him watching me. It brought everything back, Mark. I don't know why he was there, but I thought you should know." I clenched the phone tightly, a mix of anger and protectiveness surging through me. Just when I thought we were making progress, the ghost of her betrayal reappeared, threatening to undo everything we'd worked for. "We'll deal with this," I said firmly. "Together." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized that despite everything, I still cared deeply for Jenna. Enough to fight for her. Enough to fight for us. Ryan's unexpected reappearance felt like a cruel twist of fate. Just as Jenna and I were beginning to rebuild, here he was dredging up everything we were trying to move past. That night, after her call, we sat on the couch, the tension thick in the air. "Do you think he's trying to start something again?" I asked, my voice tight. Jenna shook her head quickly. "No. I told him it was over, Mark. I made that crystal clear. But seeing him, it rattled me. I don't want him in my life or ours." I believed her. For all the trust she'd broken, her resolve in that moment seemed genuine. Still, the thought of Ryan lurking around her art class, inserting himself into her world again, made my blood boil. The next day, I decided to take control of the situation. I contacted the art studio to ask if Ryan was enrolled in the class. The receptionist confirmed he was, and my stomach churned. I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him directly, to tell him to back off, but another part of me knew that might escalate things. Instead, I called Alex, who always had a way of cutting through my emotional fog. "He's testing boundaries," Alex said when I explained the situation. "If Jen is serious about ending things with him, she needs to make that clear again. This time, with no ambiguity." "She already told him it's over," I argued. "What else can she do? Sometimes people like Ryan don't take no for an answer until they see consequences," Alex said. "If he doesn't get the message, you might have to escalate. But let her take the lead first." That evening, Jenna and I sat down to discuss how to handle it. "I don't want him disrupting our progress," I said. "You need to tell him, again, that this is done and he needs to respect that." She nodded, her expression resolute. "You're right. I'll talk to him tomorrow, somewhere public. And I'll make it clear that if he doesn't respect my boundaries, I'll take further action." The next day, Jenna met with Ryan at a cafe near her art class. I didn't want to hover, but I parked across the street, unable to shake the protective instinct to be nearby. The meeting was brief. Through the window, I saw her sitting across from him, her posture rigid, her expression serious. She spoke while he mostly listened, occasionally leaning back in his chair as though processing her words. Finally, she stood up, said something I couldn't hear, and walked out. When she got into the car, I could see the tension in her face. "It's done," she said, her voice firm. "I told him I didn't want him in my life, and that if he didn't respect that, I'd involve the authorities." "And what did he say?" I asked. "He said he understood," she replied, exhaling slowly. "But I could tell he wasn't happy about it. That night, for the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief. Jenna had taken a stand, and I could see how much it took out of her. We sat together on the couch, the silence between us less strained than it had been in weeks. "Thank you," I said suddenly. She looked at me surprised. "For what?" "For fighting for us," I said. "I know I haven't made it easy, but I see how much you're trying." Her eyes welled with tears, and she reached for my hand. "You're worth it, Mark. We're worth it." In that moment, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't just about absolving her. It was about freeing myself from the weight of anger and resentment that had been consuming me. And while I wasn't fully there yet, I could feel myself moving closer. The days after Jenna's meeting with Ryan passed quietly, but they weren't without tension. I found myself replaying everything, questioning whether Ryan's understanding would hold. Would he truly stay away, or was this just a lull before more chaos? Jenna, for her part, seemed more committed than ever to rebuilding our marriage. She attended every therapy session with genuine effort, shared more about her feelings than she ever had before, and even initiated small gestures of intimacy, holding my hand during walks, leaving little notes on the fridge. They were small things, but they mattered. One evening, after dinner, we sat outside on the porch, the summer air warm and heavy with the scent of jasmine. For the first time in what felt like forever, we talked not about Ryan, not about the affair, but about life. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" I asked, staring out into the darkness. "Every day," she admitted. "I think about all the moments I could have made a different choice, all the times I could have told you what I was feeling instead of keeping it inside. But then I think maybe this was what it took for us to wake up." I turned to her, surprised. "Wake up?" She nodded, her expression earnest. "We were both on autopilot, Mark. You with your work, me with the business. We were living parallel lives, but we weren't really living together. I hate what I did, and I'll regret it forever, but I think it forced us to really look at ourselves and each other." Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time, I felt like I could see the truth in them. As much as her betrayal had shattered me, it had also forced me to confront my own flaws, my own role in the distance that had grown between us. A few days later, during therapy, Dr. Harper asked us to reflect on what we'd learned about ourselves throughout this process. "I've learned that I need to be more present," Jenna said, her voice steady. "Not just in our marriage, but in my life. I've always been so focused on achieving, on being successful, that I lost sight of what really matters." "And what matters now?" Dr. Harper asked. "Mark," Jenna said without hesitation. "Our marriage, the life we've built together. I don't want to lose that, no matter how much work it takes to fix." Her answer caught me off guard. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in months, I saw not just the woman who had hurt me, but the woman I had fallen in love with, the one who was willing to fight for us. When it was my turn, I hesitated, unsure of how to put my feelings into words. "I've learned that I can't control everything," I said finally. "I thought if I worked hard enough, provided enough, that everything else would just fall into place. But life doesn't work like that. Marriage doesn't work like that." Dr. Harper nodded. "And what does that realization mean for you moving forward?" "It means I need to stop taking Jenna and our marriage for granted," I said, turning to her. "I need to show up, not just as a provider, but as a partner." Jenna reached for my hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I think we're finally starting to find each other again," she said softly. That night, as we lay in bed, I felt a quiet sense of peace for the first time in what felt like forever. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time, I believed we could make it. Not by pretending the past hadn't happened, but by acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward together. Months passed, and while the scars of what happened would always remain, they began to fade into the background. Therapy became less about addressing the pain of the affair and more about strengthening the foundation we were rebuilding. Slowly but surely, we started to feel like partners again, rather than two people sharing the same space. The turning point came one quiet Saturday morning. Jenna and I were having coffee on the porch, the sunlight filtering through the trees. She looked at me, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I set my cup down and thought about it for a moment. I think we already are, I said. We're not perfect, and we never will be. But we're trying. That has to count for something. She reached for my hand, her touch gentle but certain. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling, for giving us another chance, for believing in me, in us. It wasn't easy, I admitted. There were days I wanted to walk away, days I thought I couldn't forgive you. But every time I looked at you, I saw more than what you did. I saw the woman I married, the life we built together, and the love that's still there. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of guilt or sorrow. They were tears of hope, of gratitude. A few weeks later, we took a small trip together, a weekend getaway to a quiet cabin in the mountains. It was nothing extravagant, but it was exactly what we needed. No distractions, no reminders of the past, just us. We hiked during the day, cooked dinner together in the evenings, and sat by the fire at night, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly connecting. There were no barriers, no unspoken resentments, just two people who had chosen to fight for each other. As we drove home from the trip, Jenna reached over and took my hand. Mark, she said, her voice steady. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. I'll never stop trying to be better for you, for us. You don't have to spend your life making it up to me, I said. What's done is done. What matters now is what we build from here. And that was the truth. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to let it stay there. I couldn't change what had happened, and neither could Jenna. But we could decide what came next. Looking back, the affair was the most painful experience of my life. It shattered my trust, my confidence, and the image of the marriage I thought we had. But in a strange way, it also forced us to confront the cracks we'd been ignoring for years. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. A choice to stay, to fight, to forgive, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Jenna and I aren't perfect, and we never will be. But we're trying, and for the first time in a long time, I believe that's enough.